For 211 years I have listened, and only in the last of them did I understand that I had been listening to a grief. I am Asel Rehan, first ear of the array at Thessal Deep, and my whole long life has been spent inside a sound the galaxy calls the threat. It is not a threat. I want to say that plainly before I say anything else, because it took me the greater part of my life to learn it, and I have very little of that life left in which to say it aloud. The signal that runs along the edge of the human quiet is not a threat. It is a roll of the dead, read patiently in the tongues of the dead, and it has been read that way for 1,000 years, and it has never once stopped. And by the end of this account, you will understand that its not stopping is the most terrible mercy in the sky. Thessal Deep is a dead moon at the rim of a dead system, and the array is a canyon we cut into it before my grandsire's grandsire was hatched. 900 dishes stand in that canyon, each one taller than a temple, their throats turned outward toward the region we do not name, and every dish has a name, and I have known all their names since I was a cub carried through the cold halls on my father's back. When you are born into the array, you are born into the sound. It is under everything. It is the floor beneath the floor. On the day I first understood speech, I already knew the signal, the way a fish knows water without ever having a word for it, and I did not know then that it was a voice, and I did not know that the voice was patient, and I did not know that it was reading names. We are the Serev. We are a listening people. Long before we built ships, we built ears, great stone bowls on the high ridges of the homeworld, tilted at the sky, and priests who sat beneath them their whole lives writing down what the sky said. When at last we crossed into the black, we did not go as conquerors. We went as listeners. Other species mapped the dark with their fleets. We mapped it with our patience. And that patience is why the conquered gave us the array, and gave us the vigil, and gave me in time the title of first ear, which is the oldest and the loneliest office my people keep. The first ear does not command. The first ear does not decide. The first ear listens to the human signal and writes down what it hears, and passes the writing to those who will not read it, and dies, and is replaced. That is the whole of the office. I did not always understand that it was also a kind of mourning. Let me tell you what the signal was, before I tell you what it is, because for 200 years I believed the first thing and the truth was the second, and the distance between them is the distance across which my whole people are about to be lost. The signal is a broadcast. It comes from the edge of the human region, from a line in the black that our instruments can measure precisely, though our eyes can find nothing there. No wall, no beacon, no ship, nothing but the ordinary emptiness of the deep with one extraordinary thing running through it. Along that line and outward from it, the signal is transmitted continuously, at a strength that has not varied by a hair's width in the 1,000 years we have measured it, in a form so clean and so deliberate that no natural process could have made it and no accident could sustain it. It is manufactured. It is meant. Someone is sending it and has never stopped sending it and does not care whether anyone is listening. For most of that 1,000 years, we could not read it. That is the thing the young do not understand when they come to the array for the first time, their eyes bright, certain they will be the one to crack it. They imagine the signal is a code, a lock, a puzzle with an answer, and that cleverness will open it. It is not a code. It was never hidden. That is the horror the young discover slowly, over years, as the brightness goes out of their eyes and the patience comes into them, or they leave. The signal is not encrypted. It is simply spoken in languages we do not know, languages no living thing has spoken in a very long time. And the reason we could not read it was not that it was hidden from us, but that everyone who could have read it was already dead. Think on that. A signal you cannot understand not because it is secret but because it is spoken to the vanished, in the voices of the vanished, and you are not among them yet. When I was young, before I was first ear, I sat the deep watches in the lowest hall of the array, where the oldest dishes feed their throats into the great cold machines that turn sound into pattern and pattern into script. The hall is quiet in the way that only a place built around a single unending sound can be quiet. The signal is so constant that the ear stops hearing it and hears instead the small human sounds, the tick of cooling metal, the drip of condensation off the dishmouths far above, the breath of the watch beside you. And under all of it, always the signal, like a tide you have stopped noticing because you were born at its edge. In those years I did what all the young do. I tried to break it. I built new filters and new nets. I taught the machines to listen for repetition, for structure, for the bones of grammar under the flesh of a strange tongue, and slowly over decades. For it is always decades in this work, never days, the machines began to give me back pieces. Not meaning, never meaning, not then, but shape. I learned that the signal was not one voice but many. I learned that it cycled, that it ran through a long sequence and then began the sequence again, and that the sequence was very, very long, so long that a serif listener might spend a whole career and never hear it return to its start. I learned that the voices were divided, one section from another, by a small pause, a breath, a caesura, always in the same place, always the same length, as if the thing that spoke was turning a page. And I learned that the signal was growing. That was the discovery that made my name, in the small and terrible way that names are made in the array. I was not old then, not yet first ear, but I was the one who compared the length of the cycle across the whole span of our records, 900 years of measurement, and found that the cycle was longer now than it had been. Not by much. The signal added to itself perhaps once in a generation, a new small section slotted into the sequence, another breath, another turning of the page. Something was being appended to it from the far end where we could not reach, and whatever appended it did so rarely, and each time it did, the whole long thing grew by one voice. I did not know then what the additions were. I only knew that the signal was alive in the sense that it changed, and that it changed by growing, and that it grew by accretion, name upon name, though I did not yet have the word name for what accreted. I called them entries. I told the conquered the signal was an accreting record of unknown content, growing at a measured rate, of unknown origin, along the human line. I was commended. I was, in time, made first ear. And for 100 years after that I sat above the machines and listened to a record grow, and did not understand that I was listening to a book of the dead being read aloud, forever, to whoever might be coming next. Here I must tell you about the human quiet itself, because you cannot understand the signal without understanding the silence it runs through, and you cannot understand the silence without understanding what my people believe about it, which is almost nothing, and what is true about it, which is worse. Every species that reaches the deep learns, sooner or later, that there is a region you do not enter. It is not marked on the charts as forbidden, exactly. My colleague who kept the charts in her chart room across the Concord would tell you the region is simply blank, a stretch of the atlas where the lines stop and are not resumed, where the instruments read nothing and the ships that were sent to read it did not read back. Different peoples came to the blankness by different roads and gave it different names, but the shape of what they learned was always the same. There is a line. Beyond the line is the human quiet. Ships that cross the line do not return. Not some of them. Not most of them. Not a single one, in all the years any people has kept count, has ever crossed the human line and come back to say what is there. That is the empty set that the galaxy has learned to fear. Not a defeat. Not a massacre, a silence. You send a fleet and it does not come home and it does not send word and there is no wreck to find and no signal of distress and no enemy to name. There is only the line and the quiet beyond it and the fleet that went in and did not come out and was never heard from in any form again, except one. Except the signal. I did not connect them for 100 years. I sat above the machines and I listened to the accreting record grow, and across the Concord the charts kept their blank, and I did not understand that the record I heard growing and the ships the charts recorded as lost were the same thing, that the signal grew each time a fleet went in, that the additions were the fleets, that the human quiet did not swallow its visitors and forget them, that it took them and learned them, and read them back out into the dark in their own voices, forever, so that the next fleet approaching would hear its own kind, named among the vanished before it ever reached the line. I did not understand it until the old fleet came, and I was made to understand it, and I have been unmaking myself with the understanding ever since. They called it the Denoct Ascendancy, the fleet that came in the 209th year of my listening. I use the name though the name means little now. The Denoct were an old power, 3 systems and a proud one, a people of ships and banners who had ruled a stretch of the near dark for 1100 years, and had decided, in the way that old proud powers decide these things, that the human quiet was a superstition kept alive by the timid, and that a fleet with courage and good engines could cross the line and come back rich with the truth of what was hidden. They announced it. That was their way. They announced everything. They sent word across the conquered that the Denoct would sail into the quiet and return with the answer the galaxy had feared to seek, and that when they returned the fear would end, and the region would be opened, and the Denoct would be remembered as the people who unafraid had gone where none dared and had come home to tell. I heard the announcement in my cold hall above my machines, and I am ashamed to remember that I felt nothing much. I had heard such announcements before. The proud go in every few generations and they do not come back, and the announcement is forgotten, and the quiet stays quiet. I expected nothing else. I turned back to the signal, to the accreting record, to my long and patient failure to understand it, and I let the Denoct sail out of my thoughts as they sailed toward the line. They reached the line in the deep of that year. I know because I was listening not to them. I had no reason to listen to them, but to the signal, as always, and it was in the signal that I first knew they had crossed. The signal changed. Understand that in 200 years I had never heard the signal change while I listened. It grew, yes. I had proven that it grew, but it grew rarely, once in a generation, and I had never been the one at the dishes in the moment of a growth. No first ear before me had recorded one. The additions came at the far end, in the deep of the cycle, and by the time a new entry surfaced through the long sequence to where we could hear it, the ship that had become it was 100 years gone. We heard the entries, we never heard the entering. That night I heard the entering. It came as a break in the tide, a caesura where no caesura belonged, the small pause, the turning of the page, but out of sequence. In the middle of an entry I had heard 10,000 times, as if the reader had stopped mid-word and turned to a fresh page and begun to write. My whole body went cold. I had the deep watch alone, as the first ear often does in the small hours, and I sat forward over the machines and I did not breathe, because the signal, the constant signal, the floor beneath the floor, was doing a thing I had spent 200 years proving it did only once in a lifetime, and it was doing it while I listened. And I understood without yet understanding that something had just gone into the quiet. And then the new voice began to read. I will try to tell you what it was like, though there are no words in my tongue built to carry it, because my tongue was built by a listening people, and this was the thing we had listened for our whole history without knowing it was what we listened for. The new voice was not human. That was the first horror and the deepest. The voice that read the new entry was Denoct. It spoke in the Denoct tongue. I knew the tongue. Every conquered listener knows the great languages of the near dark, and it spoke in the particular cadence of the Denoct High Court, the formal register in which the ascendancy announced its fleets, and it read slowly, gently, without any triumph at all, a list. It read the name of the fleet. It read the name of the flagship. It read the name of the admiral and then the names of the shipmasters under her and this went on and on, the names of the crews. Not numbers, names. Every name read aloud in the Denoct tongue, in the Denoct court cadence, in a voice that was not Denoct, patiently, as one reads a roll at a rite of mourning, pausing at the small caesura between each name the way a mourner pauses to let each name be heard and grieved before the next is spoken. I sat in my cold hall and I listened to a fleet that had crossed the line that same day being read out into the dark, name by name, in its own language, in the tone of a lament, and I understood at last what the signal was. It was the roll of the dead. It had always been the roll of the dead. Every entry in that 1,000-year-long record was a fleet that had crossed the human line, and every name in every entry was a soul that had gone in and not come out, and the signal read them all, endlessly in their own tongues, one entry ending and the next beginning, and the whole vast sequence turning over at last and beginning again from the first name of the first fleet 1,000 years gone. And it did this not to boast, not to warn in the way a fortress warns, not to frighten, but to mourn, and in mourning to tell. Because who was the roll spoken to? Not the dead. The dead cannot hear their own names. The roll was read outward into the dark toward whoever was coming next. It was spoken in the crossers' own tongues, so that the next fleet of any people, approaching the line, listening as fleets always listen, would hear its own language rise out of the human quiet, and would hear in that language the names of others of its own kind who had come this way before, and would understand in its own words, without translation, without ambiguity, in the plainest possible speech. This has been tried by people like you, who spoke as you speak, and here are their names. And they did not come home, and we are sorry, and we are telling you so that you need not join them. It is a lighthouse. That is the truest thing I can say of it. It is a lighthouse that does not shine to say here is the rock, come to it, it shines to say here is the rock. Others have broken on it, do not come. And it does not shine with light, for the deep is too large for light, but with the one thing that carries across the deep and cannot be mistaken and cannot be ignored. The names of your own dead, read to you in your own voice, gently, so that you will turn back. I wept that night, alone above my machines, though the Serev are not a weeping people, and I did not weep from fear, though I was afraid. I wept because 200 years of my life had been spent listening to a mercy and mistaking it for a menace, and because my whole people had spent 1,000 years fearing a grief, and because there was no one to tell, or rather there was everyone to tell and no one who would hear, for that is the way of it. I could send the writing to those who would not read it, as first ears always had, and they would file it with the charts of the blank region and the old warnings, and the next proud fleet would go in. And the signal would grow by one more voice, and read that voice out gently into the dark, and no one would turn back, because turning back is the one thing the proud cannot do. Let me tell you how I proved it, because I did not trust my own weeping, and because the array is a place of proof and not of feeling, and because I needed to be certain before I did the thing I would do next. I took the new entry, the denocked entry, the fleet that had gone in that year, and I set the machines to hold it, to loop it, to give it to me over and over while I worked. And I compared it against the oldest records we had, the deepest entries in the sequence, the ones so old that the languages in them had died out of the living galaxy entirely and survived nowhere but in the signal itself. And I found in those oldest entries the same shape, a fleet name, a flagship, a commander, a roll of the crew, the same caesura between names, the same patient mourning cadence, the same voice, for it was always under the changing languages the same voice. Whatever read the roll read all of it, the newest fleet and the oldest, in one unbroken tone of grief, as if a single mourner had been reading names into the dark for 1,000 years, and would go on reading them for 1,000 more. And I found something in the old entries that broke me a second time, worse than the first. In the very oldest entries, the languages were ones we had names for, but no speakers of dead tongues of dead peoples, empires that had risen and fallen and crumbled to dust in the near dark, while the signal read their lost fleets on and on. And in a few of the oldest, the language was one we had no name for at all, a tongue that survived in no record anywhere in the conquered, spoken by no one, remembered by nothing, except the signal, which read it still, patiently, name by name, the roll of a people so long gone that the galaxy did not know they had ever existed, kept alive in the only place they were kept alive at all, in the human mourning of their dead, read outward into a dark where no one remained who could have known to grieve them. The humans remembered them. That is what I understood. The humans, whom no one has ever seen, whom no ship has ever come home to describe, who have never in 1,000 years sent a single word into the conquered except this roll. The humans remembered peoples that the living galaxy had entirely forgotten, and read their names still, in tongues no living throat could shape, not because anyone was listening, not because it did any good, but because the names were true and the dead were dead, and someone once had decided that the dead of the human line would be spoken and not swallowed, would be grieved and not forgotten, would be read outward forever in their own voices, so that they would not be lost twice, once to the quiet, and again to the silence that comes when the last mourner stops. I have spent my life among a listening people, and I tell you I have never encountered a thing so patient, so exact, so without profit or pride, so purely a grief as the human signal. And I have never encountered a thing so misunderstood. We called it the threat. The Denacht, sailing in, called it a superstition. All of us, all of the galaxy, all these 1,000 years, looked at a lighthouse of the dead and saw a fortress, saw a boast, saw a menace daring us to come. Because a menace is a thing you can defy, and a fortress is a thing you can dream of breaking, and a boast is a thing that pride demands you answer, and all of these give the proud a reason to sail in. But grief gives you nothing to defy. Grief only asks you to turn back. And the proud cannot turn back from grief, because to turn back you must first believe that the grief is for you, that the dead in the roll are truly your kin and not fools who lacked your courage, that you too will be read out gently into the dark by a mourner who does not hate you. And the proud cannot believe that, because the proud cannot believe they will lose. So the roll grows. That is the whole of the tragedy told plainly. The humans mourn and read the mourning outward, and the proud hear it and call it a threat and sail in to break the threat. And the humans mourn them too, and read them outward with the rest, gently in their own tongue, so that the next fleet may turn back and the next fleet does not turn back, because it too is proud. And so the roll grows name upon name, generation upon generation, a mercy that has never once been received as mercy, a warning that has never once been heeded as warning, a grief poured out for 1,000 years into a dark that answers it only by sending more dead. I should have stopped there. A first ear's whole office is to listen and to write and to pass the writing to those who will not read it and to die. I had done the first and the second. I could have done the last. But I am a Serev, a listening people, and I could not bear that a thing so true should be heard by no one who would understand it, and I did a foolish thing, and it is the reason I am telling you this now, and it is the reason my own people's names are entering the roll as I speak. I sent word to the conquered, not the usual writing, filed and forgotten. I sent word, urgent in my own name, first ear of Thessal Deep, that the signal was understood at last, that it was not a threat but a roll of the dead, a warning of the plainest and gentlest kind, and that no fleet must ever again cross the human line, because crossing it was not danger but certainty, not a risk to be weighed but a death already grieved in advance, and that the humans were not our enemies but the keepers of a mercy we had feared for 1,000 years out of a failure to listen. We, the listening people, who of all the peoples of the near dark should have listened best, and had listened worst, because we had listened for a code, and there had never been a code, only a grief, and grief cannot be broken, only heard. I do not know what I expected. I think I expected nothing. I think I sent it because a thing so true demanded to be sent, whatever came of it. What came of it was the fleet. Not from the humans. The humans sent nothing. The humans have never sent anything but the roll. The fleet came from us, from the Serev, from the conquered, from my own people. Because when the conquered read my word, the first ear's word, that the signal was not a threat, that the human quiet was not death but merely a warning we had misread, that the humans were not enemies but grieving keepers of a line, they did not read it as I had meant it. They read it as the Denacht had read their own courage. They read it as an opening. If the signal is only a grief, some voice in the high halls of the conquered must have said, and not a weapon, if the humans do not attack but only mourn. If the quiet is not a fortress but a fear we have carried too long, then a fleet might cross at last, and find not death but whatever the humans are guarding, and come home, and open the region, and my word, my careful terrible word meant to keep every fleet forever on this side of the line, became instead the reason the conquered built the fleet that is crossing it now. They named it for me. That is the cruelty I did not foresee and cannot forgive. They called it the Rehan Passage, in honor of the first ear whose listening had, they said, at last proven the quiet safe. I heard the name of my own fleet announced across the Concord in the 211th year of my listening. The Rehan Passage, 40 ships, the finest of the Serev, sailing to cross the human line on the strength of the first ear's word that there was nothing beyond it but grief. And I sat in my cold hall above my machines, and I understood, all at once and far too late, exactly what I had done. I sent every word I had. I begged. I told them they had misread me as the Denacht had misread the sky, that a grief is not a safety, that to be mourned in advance is not to be spared but to be certain, that the roll grows precisely because the fleets that hear it decide, as the conquered had decided, that mourning means the danger is imagined. I told them that in 200 years I had heard the signal add the Denacht, and heard it read them out name by name, and that it had not read them out because they were cowards but because they had crossed, and that the Rehan Passage would cross, and would be read out too, gently, in Serev, in our own tongue, in the cadence of our own rites of mourning, and that I would be the one to hear it, because that is the office of the first ear, and that I did not want to hear it, and that they must turn the fleet back. They did not turn the fleet back. They sent me a commendation. They said the first ear's caution was noted and honored, and that it was fitting the great discovery should be tested by a people brave enough to trust it, and that when the Rehan Passage returned, the age of the human quiet would be ended, and my name would be remembered as the one who ended it. They meant it kindly. That is the thing I keep returning to in the long watches, the thing that is somehow worse than cruelty. They meant it kindly, and they were proud, and the proud cannot turn back, and so the fleet sailed. I have been at the dishes every hour since. I have not slept in the way the Serevs sleep. I sit above the machines in the cold hall with the signal running under everything, the floor beneath the floor, the roll of 1,000 years of the dead turning slowly through its endless sequence, and I wait for the caesura that does not belong, the turning of the page, the fresh voice beginning to read, and I know what tongue it will read in when it comes, and I know whose names it will speak. The Rehan Passage reached the line 4 days ago. I know because I have their last transmissions, sent back to the conquered and relayed to me as a courtesy, the courtesy of letting the first ear hear the fleet named for him approach the region he swore was safe. Their transmissions were confident. They were the transmissions of a people who had been told by their most patient listener that there was nothing ahead but a misunderstood grief. They reported the line as our instruments had always read it: no wall, no beacon, no ship, nothing but the ordinary deep with the signal running through it, and they reported the signal itself. The famous signal, the threat, now understood to be harmless, running strong and clear as they approached. Their last transmission, the one I have listened to more times than I can bear, was almost joyful. The admiral, her name is Vesicor, and I will not tell you the names of her shipmasters or her crews, because you do not need to carry them, and because I will be carrying them soon enough. The admiral reported that the fleet was crossing the human line intact, that nothing barred them, that the quiet was quiet, and that she would report again from within the region as soon as she had crossed. She has not reported again. There is no wreck. Our instruments, the finest listening instruments in the Concord, trained on the exact bearing of the Rehan Passage at the exact moment of its crossing, recorded nothing. No weapon, no explosion, no distress, no enemy. The fleet's transmissions did not cut off an alarm. They simply ended, the way a sentence ends, the admiral's confident voice reaching the natural close of a report and then not resuming. Because there was nothing to resume, because the fleet that would have resumed it was no longer there to resume anything, because it had crossed the line, and the line does not kill in any way our instruments can hear. It simply takes, and what it takes it does not give back except as a name in the roll. I am waiting for the name now. That is what I am doing as I set this down. I am the first ear of Thessal Deep, and my whole office in this hour is to sit above the machines and wait for the human signal to add my people to its grief. It has begun. I felt it an hour ago, the caesura where no caesura belongs, the small pause out of sequence, deep in the running roll, the turning of the page. My hands went cold on the machines the way they went cold 2 years past when the Denacht went in, and I sat forward, and I did not breathe, and I waited for the new voice to begin to read. It is reading now. It is reading in serif. In 211 years, I have heard the signal speak every great language of the near dark, and many small ones, and a few that no living throat but the signal itself can shape. I have never once heard it speak my own tongue. There was no serif entry in the roll in all its 1,000 years because no serif fleet had ever crossed the human line. We are a listening people. We sent ears and not ships. We stayed on this side and listened, and so our language was not in the grief. Our names were not in the roll. Our dead were not among the mourned because we had kept none of our dead there. Until now. Until the Rehan passage. Until the fleet named for me crossed the line I swore was safe, and was taken, and now the signal reads it out. It is reading in the cadence of our rites of mourning. I do not know how. I have given 200 years to the study of this signal, and I do not know how the humans who have never seen a serif, who have received from us nothing but this fleet, know the cadence in which the serif mourn their dead, the particular slow fall of the voice at the end of each name, the particular length of the caesura, the particular gentleness, the exact tone in which a serif mourner speaks the name of one they will not see again. But it knows. The signal knows. It is reading my people's names in the way my people would read them, gently, as a mourning and not a boast. And I understand now that it has always done this, that every fleet in the roll is read not merely in its own language, but in its own grief, in the exact manner that its own people mourn, so that the next fleet approaching will hear not just its language but its rights, will hear its own dead grieved correctly, in the true way, and will know that the mourner across the line understood them well enough to grieve them right. That is the last mercy, and it is the most terrible, and I am hearing it now. It read the name of the fleet first, the Rehan passage, my name, spoken gently into the dark, the name they gave the fleet in my honor, now the name of an entry in the roll of the human dead. Then the flagship, then Admiral Vesicor, her name falling slow and soft at its end the way a serif mother speaks the name of a child gone before her. And now it is reading the shipmasters, and after them it will read the crews, every name, and it will take a long time, because there were 40 ships and many souls aboard them. And the signal does not hurry. The signal has all of eternity to read, and it will speak every one of my people's names before it turns the page again and returns to the older dead, and begins once more the long, long climb back toward the fleets 1,000 years gone. And when it has read the last name of the Rehan passage, some cadet, some young serif who trusted the conquered who trusted me, the signal will have grown by one voice, and the cycle will be longer than it was, and I will sit above my machines and hear the serif entry surface through the sequence again and again for the rest of my life, because the cycle at Thessal Deep is short enough that a first ear hears the recent dead often, and I am first ear, and I will not leave the office. And so I will hear my people's names read out gently into the dark, in our own tongue, in our own grief, correctly mourned by the very thing my people spent 1,000 years fearing, until I die, and another takes the vigil and hears them still. I have thought in this last hour about sending one more word to the conquered, telling them, it is done, the fleet is lost, the signal reads it, I hear the names, turn no other fleet toward the line ever, I beg you. But I know now what they will do with that word because I know what they did with the last. They will read it as they read everything, as a challenge, as a fear to be mastered, as a quiet daring them to prove the first ear wrong once more. And they will build another fleet, and name it for some other honor and send it in, and the signal will grow again. And I will hear a second Sarev entry surface behind the first, and a third behind that, and my office will become, in the end, exactly what the human office has been for 1,000 years. The keeping of a roll of my own people's dead, read out into a dark that will not stop sending more. So I will not send the word. I will do instead what the first ear has always done, and what I have at last understood the humans across the line have always done, which is the same thing, the only thing, the thing my people were built for and forgot they were built for. I will listen. I will sit above the machines in the cold hall of Thessal Deep, and I will listen to the signal read my people's names in our own tongue and our own grief, and I will write them down, everyone correctly in the true cadence, and I will keep them, so that if the day ever comes when there is no Sarev left to remember the Rehan passage, the names will not be lost twice. They will still be in the roll. The mourner across the line will still be reading them gently into the dark. 1,000 years hence, 10,000, when my people are as forgotten as the peoples in the oldest entries whose tongues survive nowhere but in the human grief, and any listener who understands, as I understand now, will hear the Sarev names rise out of the human quiet, correctly mourned, and will know that once there was a people called the Sarev who listened, and who at the last were listened to, and who were not forgotten. Because the humans do not forget, because that is the whole of what the humans do. The galaxy calls it the threat. Let them. A threat is a thing the proud can sail against, and they will keep sailing against it, and the roll will keep growing, and there is nothing in my 211 years that can stop it, because the thing that would stop it is the one thing the proud will never do, which is to believe that the grief across the line is for them. It is for them. It was always for them. It is a mercy poured out for 1,000 years to a galaxy that has never once received it as mercy. And I, Osel Ran, first ear of Thessal Deep, who mistook it for a menace for 200 years and understood it too late by exactly one fleet, will sit now and listen to it read my people's names in the voice of our own mourning. And I will not weep again, because the Sarev are not a weeping people, and because there is a thing beyond weeping that a listener comes to at the end, which is only to listen, and to let the names be heard, and to let each one be grieved before the next is spoken. It is reading the shipmasters still. There are many, it is in no hurry, it is gentle. I am listening. I will listen for the rest of my life. And the signal will never stop.